She was there 1 minute and gone the next. That simple, brutal fact has haunted Hawkins County for years. Neighbors tore through the Wells house again and again. Search teams scoured the hills, and the family's life was dismantled by the question no one could answer. Where did Summer go? The pain of that emptiness never left the town, and neither did the hope that some overlooked fact might one day surface and change everything. Then, on an ordinary afternoon that should have been like any other, law enforcement moved in with a precision that made it clear this was not routine. At exactly 4:30 p.m., unmarked SUVs and cruisers arrived, officers in tactical gear stepped out, and a quiet warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of building most people drive past without a second thought, became the focus of a major investigative operation. The timing felt deliberate because it was... When police choose a moment down to minute, that choice usually reflects planning based on intelligence, surveillance, or a tip they believe is credible. That's what neighbors saw. A formation of vehicles arriving with purpose. Officers unspooling across the property with a calm, efficient movements of people who had rehearsed a moment in their heads long before. People in the area remembered how sudden it all felt. 1 minute the road was empty. The next it was full of law enforcement. They watched as officers, some in helmets and heavy vests, set a perimeter, photographed the exterior, and moved inside. Radios whispered. Flashlights cut through dusty darkness. Boxes and evidence bags started to appear, handled with gloved hands and folded into waiting vehicles. For a case that had lived for years in rumor and dead ends, the scene felt like a pivot point, the kind of development that could finally turn speculation into answers. The warehouse itself had stood quietly for years. Metal siding, a roll-up door, the anonymous presence of storage or industrial lot. It wasn't someplace most people associated with the Wells family, which only made its sudden role in the investigation more disturbing and more compelling. Why this building? Who had used it? Had something been stored there for months or years? Or had investigators only just been led to the site by a new, credible lead? Those were the questions the neighborhood began asking among themselves as law enforcement moved carefully through the interior, documenting each corner and sealing up anything they deemed important. Inside, investigators from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and local partners spread out methodically. The silence inside the structure was punctuated by the quiet sounds of forensic work. A camera shutter here, the rustle in evidence bag there, the murmur of agents comparing notes. This is not how police work looks when it's exploratory. This is how it looks when they are collecting something they believe matters. And when federal or state agents use that particular level of care, neighbors take notice. They notice because the TBI is selective with its resources and its language. They notice when investigators later use the word significant to describe what had been recovered. Investigators don't call recovered items significant unless those items could realistically move a case forward. As the hours unfolded, sealed containers began to appear outside the warehouse. Each one was treated as if it could hold the key everyone had been searching for since June 15th, 2021. A steady stream of boxes and evidence bags was loaded into unmarked vehicles. People standing on the road recalled watching procession and feeling a familiar combination of dread and cautious hope. Dread because the discovery might confirm the worst. Hope because it might finally explain the 2-hour window that turned a normal day into an unsolved tragedy. Those moving images, officers carrying sealed containers into waiting trucks, quickly spread through social media. Within minutes, the video and eyewitness accounts were everywhere. Neighbors on the curb, passing drivers slowing down to stare, and feeds exploding with speculation. The TBI's involvement gave the scene added weight. They had been part of the Summer Wells investigation for years, and their presence and force indicated that this was not a random follow-up. According to sources close to the investigation, the raid was not a snap decision. Detectives had been preparing, surveilling, and building the case behind the scenes. The 4:30 p.m. timing suggested the operation was scheduled for a moment when the environment could be controlled and the target was most likely in a predictable state. Whether that meant the property was typically quiet that hour or that people connected to it were less likely to be present. Whatever the reason, the operation showed planning and certainty, the kind of certainty that only builds when investigators believe they have something to secure. The scale and the secrecy of the operation raised immediate questions. Why had a warehouse been used in connection with a missing child case? Was it a storage space for items linked to the disappearance? Did it belong to someone already known to the investigation? Or had it only just come into focus because of a tip? Theories multiplied quickly. Some suggested the location may have held belongings, documents, or digital evidence, computers, phones, or paperwork that could tie a person to the Wells property or the timeline of June 15th, 2021. Others wonder whether the site might contain physical evidence, clothing, personal items, or other traces that could be forensically linked to Summer. Investigators do not, as a rule, drive a convoy to a location unless they believe what's inside will answer questions that have long threaded through the case. It matters that the TBI use careful, measured language after the raid. Significant items of interest have been recovered. Those words do not specify a body, a personal possession, or something forensic, and investigators often keep such details confidential while tests are underway. But they do indicate the recovered items were more than incidental. For a family that had endured years of false starts, every cautiously worded statement became a loaded signal. The community that once plastered Ben Hill Road with flyers set out on repeated search efforts and filled social feeds with hope and worry now faced a new phase of grief. The real possibility that the mystery would be solved and the truth would be painful. The raid also forced a renewed examination of what happened in the early, chaotic hours after Summer disappeared. June 15th, 2021 began as a normal summer day in Rogersville. Children played. Families tended to chores. Then, in the span of minutes, the Wells family realized a child was missing and everything changed. The initial search was immediate and exhaustive. Neighbors, deputies, state agents, volunteers, and 9 teams combed the wooded hollows and creeks around the property. Boats probed waterways. Drones and helicopters scanned from above, and volunteers lined up and walked every feasible path. Yet nothing definitive was found. Over the following years, leads surfaced but withered. Tips flowed in from across the country and even internationally, but each tip ultimately failed to provide the physical link that arrests or convictions require. That long silence discouraged many and embittered others. People wonder whether the initial searches had missed something small and critical. Many volunteers remembered feeling sure that if search teams had only looked a certain way or checked a specific outbuilding more thoroughly, the outcome might have been different. The discovery in the warehouse reopened those old wounds and stimulated another set of painful questions. Was the answer hidden close by all along, or was someone moving things after the fact? If evidence was missed in the original search, how was that possible given the scope and intensity of the response? If evidence was planted later, who had the motive and the opportunity to do so? In missing person work, both possibilities present forensic and investigative challenges. If the recovered items had been there since 2021, that would raise concerns about search thoroughness and the effectiveness of initial protocols. It would also raise the painful reality that this case might have been resolvable earlier, a thought that tormented many in the community. Alternately, if the materials were placed later, investigators would need to trace who had access to the property, who knew about the initial search patterns, and who had the motive to delay discovery. Either path is fraught with complexity. Either path could point to someone with intimate knowledge of the property and the family's routines, or to an outsider with calculated method to hide things from a wide-ranging search. Neighbors watching the raid described the operation in cinematic terms. Laser sights, officers moving in coordinated teams, evidence technicians photographing everything, and a steady stream of sealed containers carted away under guard. Those images sent ripples across social networks fast, and soon national audiences were again poring over the case that had once held headlines for months. Online communities that had spent years theorizing about what might have happened to Summer chewed over every frame of the raid footage. Some commenters predicted that the recovered items would be the game changer the case needed. Others counseled restraint, reminding people of the many false alarms that had already hurt the family. Even with caution urged, the practical effect of the seizure is undeniable. It gives investigators something tangible to test. Forensic labs can analyze DNA, fibers, and soils. Technicians can examine electronics for deleted messages or GPS logs, and document experts can verify if papers were recently moved or long buried. If a personal item can be linked to Summer through DNA or unique identifying features, or if a digital device ties a suspect to a location at a relevant time, the resulting leads could be decisive. Conversely, even if the evidence is indirect, traces that suggest foul play took place or that movement occurred after the fact, the significance remains. Investigators now have fresh threads to follow, and cold cases often break when someone, somewhere, decides a previously buried detail finally matters. The raid also reawakened grief in the town. In 2021, Rogersville had filled with a fervor of search parties. Yellow ribbons and flyers blurred into a sea of public exhortation and supplication. People showed up in force, borrowing tractors, pushing brush, scanning ravines. Months later, after the intense activity ebbed, the vigils became less frequent and public attention moved on. But the family's private grief never ceased. For years, the Wells family continued to live inside that absence. When the news of the warehouse raid spread, neighbors felt the old sorrow return, coupled with anxiety that this new evidence might finally answer the question they feared most. There's also a communal need for accountability, for understanding how confusion and possible missteps in the early search period may have shaped the trajectory of the investigation. Residents asked about search protocols and whether any oversight occurred in those frantic first days. Investigators must now reconcile years of interviews and evidence with the new material. That means return to earlier statements, rechecking timelines, and revisiting any leads that once seemed unpromising. For detectives, a recovered item is not a finished product. It is the beginning of a new cycle of verification that may overturn prior assumptions and refocus where investigators concentrate their efforts. From an investigative standpoint, the discovery in the warehouse potentially opens several lines of inquiry. Forensic analysis may determine whether items were in the building at the time of Summer's disappearance or placed there later. If trace materials on a recovered object match elements at the Wells property, soil types, plant fragments, or unique fibers, that could suggest a connection. Digital data could reveal movement patterns, communications, or deletions consistent with hiding or disposing of evidence. Even mundane items, like a single shoe or a piece of fabric, can be pivotal when they carry biological traces. In many cold cases, it is the smallest match that unlocks a long-dormant puzzle. But there are also human dynamics at play. People who previously remained silent may now reconsider. Long-guarded secrets sometimes loosen when the understanding that the walls are closing and becomes palpable. Informants who once feared retaliation might feel safer coming forward. Community members who noticed odd behavior years ago but dismissed it in the fog of rumor could decide that now is the time to speak. Detectives know this. They also know that time can erode the reliability of memory, making corroboration essential. That is why the chain of custody and meticulous documentation of what was seized at the warehouse are critical. Every item must be tracked, cataloged, and analyzed under strict forensic standards so that, if charges are eventually filed, the evidence will withstand legal scrutiny. Public reaction to the raid has been mixed but intense. Some expressed a weary hope, saying that anything that moves the investigation forward is welcome. Others reacted with skepticism, recalling how many leads had once been touted as promising only to evaporate. Social platforms turned into forums of speculation and emotional reaction. In some circles, the moment felt like the long-sought turning point. In others, it was another painful reminder that the path from discovery to accountability can be long and uncertain. Amid the swirl of public conversation, authorities urged calm. Law enforcement officials asked that rumors not be treated as facts and requested that anyone with credible information contact investigators through official channels. That request is both practical and strategic. Rumors can mislead and damage the integrity of an investigation, while verified tips, even ones that seem small or trivial, can be the threads that unravel a bigger truth. The TBI's communication emphasized that significant items had been recovered but stopped short of publicizing specifics, underscoring the investigative imperative to protect sensitive information until results were confirmed. For the Wells family and for the community, the seizure at the warehouse is, above all, an emotional pivot. It represents a fragile edge between hope and confirmation, between the possibility that Summer might somehow still be found alive and the devastating reality that evidence may now point to a grim conclusion. That emotional ambiguity is the most difficult part of such developments. Families in this situation face renewed pain as they confront what recovered evidence might mean. At the same time, there is an understandable desire for answers, for the ability to place blame and to gain the closure that comes with knowing what happened. As night fell on the day of the raid, and vehicles departed with their sealed containers, residents of Hawkins County were left with a new, raw sense of the case's immediacy. The ordinary stretch of road returned to its usual hush, but now every creak and rustle felt charged, as if the town itself was listening for the next chapter. Investigators said they would analyze the evidence thoroughly, running it through forensic labs and cross-referencing it with past interviews and tips. That process will take time, weeks, perhaps months, and the public will have to wait for forensic clarity that only scientific testing can provide. Patience, for now, must be the community's companion. This story, like many missing person investigations, is not a closed book. It is a narrative that bends and shifts as new facts appear. The raid at 4:30 p.m. is a dramatic page in that story. Possibly a turning point, possibly the beginning of the end, possibly only a step in a long process. But it matters because it gives investigators physical material to test, and because it reawakened the search in the public imagination. In cold cases, momentum matters. Renewed attention can prod witnesses to speak, prompt analysts to re-examine old evidence, and pressure systems to move a case forward. If you saw anything unusual on June 15th, 2021, or if you have information about the warehouse or anyone associated with it, investigators ask you to come forward. Even small details, a vehicle's make and model, a scrap of fabric remembered in a drawer, a brief conversation overheard years ago, can be powerful. Law enforcement needs specific, verifiable leads, dates, times, descriptions, photos with metadata, and first-hand observations. Rumors and speculation online can be noisy and distracting. Concrete tips are what help solve cases. The raid's imagery, a quiet warehouse, a sudden influx of officers, sealed evidence leaving in the twilight, will be remembered by the town for a long time. It was a moment when a community that had been waiting for answers saw active, visible effort put into unearthing them. Whether these recovered items ultimately yield the proof needed to charge a suspect or to reconstruct the final hours of Summer's life remains to be seen. What is certain is that the case has shifted. What had become a memory wrapped in uncertainty now carries a fresh, forensic possibility. Years from now, this operation could be looked back upon as the day the truth finally edged into view, or it could be remembered as another attempt that, despite its promise, fell short. Either way, the people of Rogersville have been reminded that a missing child story never truly goes away, and that investigators, however quietly, continue to pursue answers. The warehouse on the edge of town is no longer anonymous. It now stands as a place that drew the attention of state investigators, a location that could hold the pieces necessary to resolve a mystery that has gripped a family and a community for far too long. Until forensic tests and official confirmations are complete, speculation must remain tempered by patience and respect for the investigative process. But for the first time in years, those who want truth and justice for Summer Wells can point to something concrete, a place, a time, and evidence that investigators deemed important enough to seize. Whether that material yields closure or prompts further questions, it marks a meaningful advance in a case too long suspended in uncertainty. If you have relevant information, contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation or local law enforcement through official channels. Small observations can become the key that unlocks long-closed doors. For now, the community watches and waits, hoping that this carefully executed operation will finally shine light into the dark spaces where answers have been kept. The path ahead is uncertain, but the search continues, with renewed urgency and an evidence-driven focus that perhaps will bring the justice Summer and her family deserve.